Chapter 9. No Job for a Goblin.
"This is all your fault, you thieving git,"
said Snottruck. The mournful song of squigpipes blared in the tunnels behind them. Cymbals clashed, horns hooted. The hunters were away behind them, nets and squig pacifying clubs ready. It wouldn't do for them to get in the way of the bait. Far off in the winding corridors ahead of Snottruck and Runtgit, squighounds bayed and snuffled.
"I'd save your breath for running if I was you, Snottruck,"
said Runtgit. He flexed on his toes, bent his knees and stretched out his calves. He started to roll up his new robe, all black and proper as a night goblin's robe should be, not like the tattered thing he used to wear while he was simply the runt. He thought better of it, shucked it off and rolled it up neatly and jammed it behind a rock.
"Yeah,"
said Snottruck.
"what do you do with your legs? Why are you taking your clothes off, stupid runt? They should never have made you a boy." "I'm doing it, you three-fingered idiot, so's I can run fast, aren't I?"
Snottruck snorted.
"You ain't going to outrun a cave squig, is you?" "Don't have to outrun no cave squig,"
said Runtgit wickedly. A slow smile split his face. Snottruck's eyes widened as understanding dawned. He fumbled at his belt and tugged off his runt boy's apron and then his robe. They both stood shivering, naked but for their loincloths. The cave was dark, so dark even night goblin eyes strained to see.
"I am going to mess you up, runt. I am going to get you." "Not today, you're not,"
said Runtgit. He hocked up something nasty and spat it on the floor right by Snottruck's feet.
"Yeah, yeah,"
said Runtgit. He tugged at the rope around his waist, making sure it was nice and tight. At the other end was a round ball of small beasts gathered from the goblin's cesspool. Their drops, all tied together by their tails. Snottruck had a bait ball just the same. The animal's flesh had been sliced, so their juices left a trail upon the floor wherever Runtgit and Snottruck went. They mewled and struggled pathetically, half dead.
"Who says?" "I do. You ain't got time, matey, because here they comes."
The baying of squighounds grew louder. Runtgit turned on his heels and took flight as a trio of cave squigs burst from a fissure. The round balls of their bodies sailed through the air, bashing into one another as they came. They bounced off the far wall and hit the ground with a series of loud slaps. A pack of squighounds came hurrying from the opening after them, twisting over one another and snarling. The nails on the squighounds' 6 feet rattled out a rapid drumbeat of pursuit, and they barked and nipped at the horny heels of their bigger cousins. The cave squigs turned this way and that, claws clicking and clacking, trying to bite down on these annoyances, teeth as long as goblin swords clashing as they snapped their rubbery mouths. The squighounds darted under the cave squigs' globular bodies, always out of reach. Then Squig pipes honked close behind them, and the cave squigs turned in fear at the sound of the music. Snottruck gaped in terror and fled after Runtgit. The two goblins ran along twisting tunnels carved by who knows what. Stones reached out to snag them. Crevasses in the rock gaped before them. The squigs bounded after them, their short but powerful legs propelling them in a series of hopping leaps, ricocheting from the tunnel walls as they came. The bay of squig hounds and the dread noise of the squig pipes hooted behind the cave squigs. The swift shapes of tasty goblins trailing even tastier squigs behind them ran in front. Their small minds needed little encouragement in which direction to go. Runtgit and Snottruck ran as fast as their legs could carry them. The squig's bounding motion would bring them dangerously close, only for them to fall behind as they gathered their feet in for the next jump.
"We're not going to make it!"
shouted Snottruck. He tried to grab at Runtgit, to throw him back into the mass of leathery flesh pounding after them.
"Get off!"
shouted the ex-rump.
"Come on, this way!"
He pointed to a smooth hole leading off the main tunnel, diving into it head first. Snottruck dithered. He looked at the charging squigs and threw himself after Runtgit. The hole was just big enough for him. The tunnel beyond led upwards, the rock slippery with slime. He banged his head as he went in and slid backwards. Cave squigs called, bass, harrowing noises, and their vicious white teeth snapping. For a terrifying moment, Snottruck thought he would slip right into their jaws. Impelled by terror, he scrabbled up the tunnel, leaving the spherical creatures thrusting at the tunnel mouth impotently, claws and spines rasping on the rock. Runtgit sat in a cave, knees up around his chin, in the middle of a crowd of inch-high mushrooms. Bigger, leathery fungi filled the cramped space behind him.
"Nearly got you, eh? Told you I was faster,"
he said smugly.
"I'm going to kill you, Runt." "Runtgit,"
said Runtgit.
"I'm Runtgit now. And no, you're not going to kill me, is you?" "Oh yeah? Who's going to see me? I could do you in and no one would be wise to it."
Snottruck strode towards the other goblin, long arms out, hands ready for a strangling. Runtgit was undeterred.
"Know where we are, Snottruck?"
said Runtgit. His conversational tone set alarm bells ringing in Snottruck's mind. His ears twitched.
"See them there, them big old shrooms? Them are squig shrooms. Cave squig shrooms. Found these a while back. See the shroom heads? All droopy, ain't they? I knows a lot about mushrooms, me. They're just waiting for something to feed on. Oh, look!"
Runtgit picked up his bait ball. Blood dripped onto the earth.
"I reckon they should be ready to sprite right about now."
A chirruping and scrabbling came to their ears. Snottruck paused.
"What's that?" "Squiggling, see?"
Runtgit pointed to a patch of soil heaving under a mushroom. Small round bodies pulled themselves out of the ground, blinking and cheeping like birds. They waddled, wide eyes quickly taking on the piggy viciousness common to all squigs. Their cheeps became snarls.
We take this lot in, we'll get loads of teeth. What do you say? Deal? Oh, yeah,
said Snottruck. The ground boiled as a flood of cave squiglings burrowed up out of the dirt.
And let you take all the credit? That's how you work, Runt. I seen it.
He stamped hard on a squigling and popped it wetly. A fan of guts spread across the dirt.
I'm not falling for that. No teeth or glory for you.
He began stamping with gusto, turning the young cave squigs into a smeary paste.
What do you think you're doing?
Shouted Runtkit.
These squigs will make us both bosses. Nah, make you a boss, you mean?
Stomp, stomp, stomp went Snottruck's feet. He snatched an uncommonly large squigling up from the ground. He waved it at Runtkit.
I'm not falling for your double crossing, Runt. I knows you, and don't you forget it.
He drew a nail hard across the squig's face, cutting its eye and skin. It squealed piteously. Fluid leaked from its ruined eye. Runtkit slapped it out of his hand. The tiny squig bounced from Snottruck's grasp and rolled across the floor. Snottruck shoved past Runtkit, but Runtkit hooked a foot under his leg and pulled. The runt boy skidded on the mess of guts and fell hard. The little squig, blind in one eye, snuffled its nose at Runtkit and took a step forward. Runtkit smiled at it. Perhaps it was the memory of Snotty, or maybe he was simply being capricious, as goblins can be. But he felt like sparing it both Snottruck's feet and the iron prods of the squig herders.
Nah, little fella, off you go then, off you go.
He shooed it away. The squig snuffled, hesitated, turned, and hopped down a hole at the back of the cave. Snottruck squealed as other squiglings worried at him with their teeth. He was fortunate, for the teeth of a fresh squigling are soft and dull, and yet they still bite hard. Runtkit backed towards the hole they'd come from as Snottruck batted and swatted at the squiglings swarming up his legs.
Do you know much about squigs?
Runtkit said.
Another thing I've learnt, Snottruck, me old mate, is that when the squiglings hatch, Daddy Squig is never far away.
Snottruck stood, panting and furious.
Yeah, so? Not going to get us in here, is it? Not going to get up that chute, is he? Ah, yeah, I should have said. There's 2 entrances to this cave, Snottruck.
A low growl sounded behind Snottruck. His mouth gaped, his ears fell, his knees knocked together, and his shoulders slumped.
He's behind me, isn't he?
He whimpered. Baleful yellow eyes opened. The adult squig was so big they glowed either side of Snottruck in the dark.
Oh yes he is, my friend,
said Runtkit. He waggled his fingers in a wave.
Byesy bye. I'd say I'd miss ya, but I ain't gonna.
He hopped out backwards down the tunnel. He slid quickly, tumbling out into the passage where they'd fled the stampeding squigs. He slid on his belly down the wet stone and shot out into the main tunnel. Out in the tunnel, the squigs were trussed and helpless, pinned down by weighted nets. One was being dragged away by a sweating team of hunters. A trio of burly goblins battered at the other two with huge squig pacifiers. One such club came quickly towards Runtgit's face. "Rosler, stop!" said a goblin. The club stopped a finger's breadth from Runtgit's nose. "Ah!" said Runtgit. "Hey, it's one of them boys who got sent in as bait, Rosler." The goblin herder who spoke was covered in scars and tattoos. His arms bulged as he pointed. "Oh yeah, so it is Fugrack," said the goblin with the club. "Thought you was a squig," said the goblin to Runtgit. He smiled in a way that suggested he did not much care one way or the other if Runtgit's brains were smashed from his skull. "I thought you got eaten," said the one named Fugrack. The squig he was minding barked and whined, shifting in its net. "Quiet down, you!" he yelled, then walloped it with a squig pacifier the size of Runtgit. "Yeah, don't like that, do you?" Fugrack cupped his hands to his mouth and called out, "All bagged and ready to go. Good job, lads." Runtgit accepted Rosler's hand and pulled himself up. He began to laugh, quietly at first, but soon he was squeaking with amusement like a snotling on a fungus beer bender. Fugrack and Rosler looked at each other. They shrugged. Rosler spun his finger around his temple. "Mad!" he mouthed. "What's so funny, little runt?" asked Rosler. Runtgit shook his head, gulping for air. "Timed to perfection," he said. "Timed to perfection." Snot-truck they dragged from the cave, missing an ear and scared witless. He'd found a cleft in the rock to hide in, where the squig couldn't quite take off his head. It took 5 squig herders to subdue the large, brooding squig he and Runtgit had disturbed. He'd soiled his robes in fright. A peculiar smell followed Snot-truck around for weeks afterward. Much to Snot-truck's annoyance, he had been right. Runtgit did get all the credit for finding the squiglings. "You can't have everything," said Skarsnik to me years later. "I wanted him to get it. He didn't get it. I was going to regret that. Oh, yes. I was Bricky-strap, me old mucker. Rule 3, you see. Always have another plan. What can go if your first plans go wrong?" A plan B," I timorously offered. "And what's B's got to do with it? Stupid Umi, another plan, not B's." He rocked his hand dismissively. His favourite servant topped up his goblet from a pitcher of fungus beer. "But then, Scods in it, Gork and Mork. They do things in ways what I can't understand. And I understand stuff better than any other gobbo. I was not happy at all that Snot-truck did not get all up. But if it hadn't been for old Snot-truck," he looked around his domain, holding up his hand, indicating that I should do the same, "I wouldn't be here at all,
And all this, well, it wouldn't be mine, would it?
Runtgit was taken on as third runt boy by the runt boss. In no time at all, he had Grobskab's approval. He was given 2 teams to oversee. They were well marshalled, each gang equipped with snotlings he trained himself to sniff out the best flesh rooms. His stature grew among the other goblins, if not his actual size, at least not at first. So impressive was the harvest his gangs brought in, he was soon put in charge of a 3rd runt team. Snottruck grew insanely jealous of Runtgit's new measure and would watch the diminutive runt boy, always clad in a robe slightly too big that flopped over his hands and eyes, directing his runts in ways Snottruck could never hope to emulate. As goblins will, Snottruck plotted the downfall of his rival. There is nothing unusual in this. It is simply the way of life among the Greenskins. It was, however, very unfortunate for Snottruck that he was plotting the downfall of the wiliest goblins who have been spawned in generations. Runtgit knew what Snottruck was up to, but did not move against him. Instead, he entertained himself by foiling his rival's every trick. Everything Snottruck tried went awry. Every good thing he did was attributed to his hated rival, and every time he thought he'd got one up on Runtgit, all his runts would get mysteriously eaten, or he'd come down with a terrible case of the drop trots that laid him up for days. When he was not running for the drops, clutching at his backside, at any rate. Runtgit was not satisfied. He wanted more. When the others slept, he would stay awake, scratching in the dirt by the ancient fire bowls on the lower landing. He would not waste his time at dice, not unless he could rig it so that he won for sure and squeeze favours out of the other boys. Runtgit had more time to think. He had always been thinking anyway, so his additional time spent in cogitation meant he thought a prodigiously large amount for a goblin. More, perhaps, than any goblin to have ever lived. He took to eavesdropping on his betters and listening to the stories the old Scar-Gobbos and little Big-uns told around the fire, ingratiating himself with them with the special fungus ales and choice foods his growing piles of mushrooms brought him. As his wealth of mushrooms and orc teeth accumulated, so did his knowledge grow. Runtgit had a taste of power, and he wanted more. His mind returned to the Ratman. Skreekrit, languishing in the cells off the landing. He planned, he wheedled, he put words in ears and ideas in the minds of his elders and betters. The other young goblins thought him a lick-spittle, so differential he was to the likes of Duffskull, Tarkit and Grobskab. But he had his plans, and he did not care. After many weeks of schemings, one of those plans was ready for execution.
Thing is,
Skarsnik said,
them skaven are a tricky bunch. They's always wanting to make deals and do this and that. And then what? They try and stab you in the back. And then I have to teach them a lesson. And this happens.
He gestured to a rat skull on a spike and gave a wicked grin.
Don't matter, mind. Gobboys is no better. In some ways, we's the same. In other ways, not. But there's one thing I didn't know back then, and what I know only too well now.
He looked at me with a half smile, as if he was sharing a good joke.
There's thousands of the hairy bleeders. Thousands and thousands of them.
He stamped his foot on the ground. His brows knotted, and he sneered.
Down there. Place is crawling with them. Even after what I did to them. But that came later.
Skarsnik Yellowtooth limped ahead of Runtgit, who, for once, was feeling nervous.
Where we go?
Said Skarsnik.
Down here, and then that way.
Runtgit pointed.
I cannot see, stupid green thing.
Chirruped the rat man.
I have blindfold, no eyes. Yeah, that's 'cause I don't want you to know where we is going, do I?
He prodded the rat man in the back with his spear. He pulled a lump of dried mushroom out of a pocket and bit down on it. The rat man stumbled.
Watch out there. Gets a bit bumpy, you might say,
he said, spraying crumbs.
Stupid green thing.
Runtgit kept his eyes on the rat man. The story he'd spun to get the rat boy out of the cage had been an outrageous lie, even by his standards. No one believed it. Some nonsense about a trip to the mountainside, a wyvern egg, and an orc named Nork with a gimpy leg and a bag full of teeth. But he was in the clan's esteem. Both Grobscab and Duffskull the shaman pressed Target Finger to allow Runtgit to take the Skaven, if only because they wanted to see exactly what he would do with him. Target had been swayed, and after the thing on his finger had been properly consulted, had assented to let Runtgit take the rat man away. With all that out of the way, Runtgit's biggest worry was that he might be followed, for if his true intentions were uncovered, he would be killed. Trading with the rat men was a step too far for the backstairs boys' elders. He knew that. They would not understand what could be gained from it. But they, as he told himself often, were idiots. Not at all special like he was. Had Mork spoken to them? No, he had not. To his mind, that settled the matter. They went out of the backstairs boys' territory, the least of all the Crooked Moon tribe's domains. Runtgit was heading right for the burrows of the Ratmen. Skarsnik came to a halt, and Runtgit narrowly missed spearing him.
Oi!
Skarsnik's nose twitched.
Smell, smell! Under Empire, close! Home, home!
He said. The Ratman limped faster following that. Runtgit took them to a tunnel that lay right on the outside edge of Greenskin territory. A stately dwarf avenue lined with exquisitely carved stone trees. Runes Runtgit could not read ran along the tops of the walls, glittering with faded magic. A few of the crystal fruits descending from the stone trees' branches still held power from the old times, and the corridor was lit with their cold light. One end of the avenue was choked with rubble, the other led off, who knew where, into the distance. Below were the deepest deeps of the dwarf hold, unknown lands occupied by the Ratmen. Round, burrow-like holes punctuated the stonework, some appearing as if they'd been gnawed, others melted or chiselled through the stone by arcane powers and machines. They punctured the wall like the cells in a beehive, crowding out a well-dressed door made by the ancient mountain folk that led onto another broad roadway.
"All right, fur boy, you can take your blindfold off now,"
Runtgit said uneasily. Dust lay thick on the ground, ancient trails of paw and tail blurred by time. He had chosen this spot carefully. These were the tunnels of the rat men, all right, but the smell of the creatures on them had faded to nothing. They had been unused for a long time. From what Runtgit had heard, the rat men spent as much time fighting each other as they did the Greenskins. Skarsnik wiped at his arm with a paw. Just being here seemed to make him healthier and more upright. Skarsnik wiped at his arm with a paw. Just being here seemed to make him healthier and more upright.
"You stay close. You not speak, you not move. You say nothing or you die. You understand?"
Runtgit swallowed hard. He was beginning to think this whole plan a bad idea, but then he thought about Snottruck and how many mushrooms he was going to get out of it, and how much power. He nodded within his hood, his assent a pathetic rustle of coarse goblin cloth.
Good.
The skaven sniffed at the air.
"Sickness here. Many bad tunnels. We no go this way. Death there. And death there."
He pointed to two of the tunnels.
"This way, beard thing way."
Skarsnik pointed to the dwarf tunnel leading off the avenue.
Come. This better."
Trailing ever so reluctantly behind, Runtgit followed the limping rat-man out of his own world and into another. For the first time in his life, he felt as small as he really was. Skarsnik found it hard to describe what he saw in those tunnels. By the time I had met him, he had fought the rat-men very many times and had become inured to the wonder of their strange machineries. But from the look that crossed his face, a series of expressions, chief among them wonder, fear, amazement, and annoyance being by far his most favoured mien in general, I surmise the things he saw in this skaven under-empire the first time had made a deep and lasting impression upon him. The road they trod was dwarf-made for much of the way. Then they came to a wall built of scavenged stone blocks across the road. It filled the corridor, floor to ceiling, a walkway running along the back, halfway up its height. Rat-men in leather hoods rested long guns in its loopholes, alert to some threat or other. Their way blocked, they turned left into a warren of rat-gnawed tunnels. What did he see? He spoke of tunnels that twisted in and out of the old dwarf city. Tunnels where few rat-men were to be found at first, but then encountered in ever greater numbers. Skaven slave masters whipped gangs of scrawny rat-men. Construction teams drilled at the rock with whirring devices. Piping was being laid along the floor and bonded together with machines that shot flame hot enough to melt metal. He was cuffed and kicked along when the overseers caught him looking at these. Only Skarsnik's size and black fur prevented his death. The other ratmen looked at this battered returnee to the Under Empire with open suspicion, but none at first dared challenge him. Tunnels that began bare and unadorned gathered strange contrivances. More pipes that hissed and leaked scalding steam wrought lanterns that burned with a greenish haze, and everywhere the rank, acridly sweet stench of the ratmen. They went through caves filled with clanking machines, passed over fathomless caverns on swaying catwalks. Green lights glowed and lightning crackled far beneath their feet. Strange, snuffling monsters shoved past them, driven on by slave masters. Were he not so deep in enemy territory, Runtgit would have turned tail and fled. As they went deeper, Skarsnik was stopped numerous times. Runtgit attracted large amounts of attention at checkpoints and from patrols of ratmen warriors, but Skarsnik, bereft as he was of uniform, badges, weapons and teeth, stood tall. He was bigger than the other ratmen, far more heavily built, and his black fur appeared to intimidate these others. He chittered at them as if ordering them. They ducked and twitched, and a stink filled the corridor that stung the inside of Runtgit's nose.
"They not want to let us pass,"
said Skarsnik. He slapped at his chest.
"But I am Fang Leader, Storm Vermin, Black Fur. They listen or they die."
Runtgit followed the ratman, no longer sure who was the captive and who was the captor. They came to a crooked tower on the side of a crooked way. Bronze chains and bells streaked green with verdigris, skeletons in gibbets, and smoking lamps festooned it on all sides. The skaven stopped before his doorway and looked it up and down.
"This mine, my post, guardway."
They went in. What exactly happened next, Runtgit could only guess. There were more of the black-furred ratmen in there, these heavily armoured. Their equipment, unlike nearly all that Runtgit had seen so far, was well forged and well oiled. Some of it looked dwarf-made. The other black furs were very surprised to see Skarsnik. Tails swished uneasily, and paws went to swords. A conversation of rapid squeals ensued between Skarsnik and another black fur, whose helmet bore an elaborate crest. The black fur cheered a laugh and went for its sword. There was an explosion of movement, almost too fast to follow. Skarsnik leapt forward. His left hand closed around the other's wrist, stopping its sword from leaving the sheath. Yellow teeth snapped at Skarsnik's face. There was a squeal, and the other ratman fell to the floor, its own dagger sticking out from a gap in all its armour. All but one of the other black furs froze. This other made its challenge, hefting a heavy blade. Skreekrit's crooked tail whipped forward. In one sinuous movement, Skreekrit's tail grasped the dagger, pulled it from the dead rat man, and flicked it across the room. The knife whirred through the air, pinning the other Black Fur's hand to the doorway with a thump. His sword clattered to the floor. It squealed and tugged at its hand.
He say I dead. Didn't he say I cripple? Didn't he say how I be fang leader with no fangs? In any way, I not in charge.
The ratman snuffled rapidly at the corpse, its nose twitching violently.
He wrong. This post of Skreekrit Yellowtooth. This post of Skreekrit Yellowtooth again. I servant of Lords of 13. He traitor, not I.
He pointed and chirruped at the other Black Furs. They hurried to obey, freeing the challenger's hand from the door, removing their erstwhile commander's corpse. A sword was pressed into Skreekrit's hand by a Black Fur that bowed. For a moment, Runtgit thought he had overreached himself and would be struck down. Skreekrit was excited. His bent tail swished through the air behind him, fur bristling all over his body.
Now we remake deal, green thing. 20 sacks, these mushrooms, for 2 fists, warpstone.
Runtgit looked stiffly to the left. He smiled worriedly to the right. Elite ratmen stood, huge and armoured, all around him.
Yeah, that sounds like a good deal, Skreekrit, me old friend. 20 sacks, 2 fists, no problems.
Skreekrit's tail wrapped around Runtgit's hand.
This time, we agree skaven way.
He was escorted back to the avenue. When the Black Furs left, he fell limp to his knees. His fear had sapped his energy. After a while, he started to laugh. The deal was put into action, and so Runtgit's influence grew. He was awarded a 4th runt team.
Best runt boy I ever had,
Grobscab was heard to say. As for Duffskull, Runtgit often caught him smoking his fungus cob, staring through the smoke at him or peering thoughtfully over the top of a skull full of fungus beer. Runtgit thought this a good thing. Even the thing on Tarkit Finger's finger agreed Runtgit was a boon to the clan, and so he was left to his own devices. Runtgit had one team of his runts set to carving up and bringing the glowy rocks down out of the mountainside. Another was employed carting it to the Ratmen's labyrinth.
Of course, when I was Runtgit, quite a lot of them runts went a bit, funny,
said Skarsnik.
Glowy rocks is dangerous rocks, you know. But if they did, they was only runts, weren't they? They went down a big hole we found. Had no bottom. You could hear 'em squealing for ages.
He coughed.
Well, the ones that still had mouths.
Runtgit went to pains to ensure this was all kept a secret. Anyone caught spying on him by his squighounds or snotling alarm callers vanished. Anyone he thought might be thinking about spying on him, for Runtgit was developing a healthy sense of paranoia, had a little accident, or maybe 2 little accidents, or as many little accidents as were necessary until they were quite dead. He told me about some of these. Uxmak, ran into a Ratman patrol on his own. Gibble fell down an old dwarf well. Dubbin tripped and went into the cook pot.
Now, what are the chances of that?
Said Skarsnik of this one, as he laughed and rubbed his hands together.
Still, made the stew better, eh?
And so on. Of course, Dirk was never far away either, and if he failed to prevent outright attacks upon Runkit's person by intimidation, he generally halted said attacks mid-execution by bludgeoning use of his fists. Snottruck, who had instigated many of these attempts to uncover Runkit's secrets, or kill him, or both, became more and more frustrated. And Runkit laughed at him, but otherwise left him alone. Why? I could not discern. Was it a matter of pride, of humiliation? For all the time I spent listening to the Greenskins, I understand little of how their minds work. When I thought I had a grasp of it, Skarsnik would tell me something wildly improbable or contradictory. The green races will forever remain a mystery to us, I fear, Herr Volendor, despite your good offices in attempting their solution.
That's when I realised rule number 4 of being a sneaky git. A frustrated enemy is the worst kind,
Skarsnik said.
So bad that I almost never learned that rule.
He shook his head thoughtfully.
I almost never did.